Hey you, the one quietly convinced your relationship is the exception, enjoy that feeling, because half of all marriages end in divorce. You knew that. What you didn't know is that most of those couples call themselves happy 1 year before filing, not struggling, not fighting, happy, which means the collapse wasn't coming from where they were looking. It never does. Because marriage has a pattern, consistent, inconvenient, and older than any of us. Every couple that collapsed said the same thing in the beginning. We're different, we're stronger, we have something real. And then, somewhere between year 3 and year 15, they didn't. Not with a farewell speech, not all at once, just cold silence at dinner, separate phones, one of them on the couch, and both of them pretending they don't know exactly how they got there. They always know, they just stopped talking about it long before that. The collapse files, why marriages fall apart, and why, statistically speaking, yours is not as safe as you think. Chapter 1. Nobody sees it coming. Let's start with the most important fact about marriage collapse. Nobody sees it coming. Not the couple's friends, not their family, not the therapist they finally started seeing 6 months too late, and definitely not the two people inside it. Couples who end up divorced consistently report, in study after study, that they were mostly happy 1 to 3 years before filing. They weren't screaming, they weren't throwing things, they were just quietly losing the thing that held them together, like a building with termites. Looks fine from the outside, until it doesn't. In 1998, Gottman and his colleagues at the University of Washington videotaped 57 newlywed couples arguing for 15 minutes. Just 15 minutes. They coded every expression, every shift in tone, every moment of contempt or defensiveness. Then they waited. 3 to 6 years later, they checked which couples had divorced and found they had predicted it with 83% accuracy from a 15-minute argument. The couples who sat in that lab, newly married, had no idea they were already showing the data. They went home, had dinner, thought nothing of it. The data already knew. The point is, nobody living through it understood what was happening. They just knew things felt slightly off, and then slightly worse, and then one day someone said a sentence they couldn't take back. Chapter 2. It always starts with contempt. Here's the thing about marriages. They don't run on love exactly, or not only on love. They run on 1,000 small daily transactions, a text returned, a question asked and actually listened to, an annoyance swallowed instead of weaponized. And the moment those transactions start going negative, everything built on top of them goes negative too. Researcher John Gottman spent 40 years studying couples in what he called the Love Lab, a monitored apartment where he watched how couples interacted and, based purely on their communication patterns, predicted divorce with over 90% accuracy. What he found was not what most people expected. Marriages didn't collapse because of the big fights. They collapsed because of 4 specific patterns he called the 4 Horsemen: contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. The eye roll, the "you always do this," the silence that becomes a wall. The most lethal of the 4, according to Gottman, is contempt. Not anger, contempt. Anger says, "I'm hurt." Contempt says, "I don't respect you." And once contempt enters a relationship, it doesn't leave quietly. It rewrites the history of everything that came before it. Suddenly, you're not fighting about the dishes, you're fighting about whether the other person is fundamentally worth your patience. Every previous argument gets reinterpreted. Every old kindness gets recontextualized. The infection spreads backwards. He's not alone. In 2013, psychologist James McNulty at Florida State University followed 135 newlywed couples for 4 years, measuring something nobody had tested before. Not what couples said they felt about each other, but their automatic gut-level reactions, the split-second responses that happen before conscious thought kicks in. What he found was striking. Spouses' gut feelings about their partner at the start of the marriage predicted how their satisfaction would change over 4 years, even when their conscious stated feelings predicted nothing. In other words, the gut knew before the conversation did, before the therapist did, before anyone said the word divorce out loud. The conscious mind was still writing love letters. The automatic mind had already started grieving. It's a beautiful spiral, truly, a masterpiece of self-destruction. Chapter 3. Communication stops working. Alongside the contempt comes something worse. The conversations stop being real, and once that starts, it almost never reverses on its own. Every collapsing marriage has a moment where the two people stop actually talking. Not dramatically, not all at once. It's more like a slow leak. The hard conversations get postponed, the postponed ones get avoided, the avoided ones become the things you can't say anymore, because too much time has passed, and now saying them would mean admitting you've been carrying them for years. And so the couple develops a kind of managed silence, not hostile exactly, just hollow. Faith is actually the key word here. Marriages run on a kind of collective belief, a shared assumption that the other person is on your side, that the relationship is a safe place to be honest, that vulnerability won't be used against you. The moment enough of that belief erodes, the whole system stops working, because the system was always just two people agreeing to act like it worked. Couples who divorce cite communication problems as the #1 cause in nearly every survey ever conducted on the subject. Not infidelity, not money, communication, which sounds almost disappointingly mundane until you realize what communication problems actually means. Two people who stopped believing it was safe to tell each other the truth. And the worst part, the part that should genuinely unsettle you, is that by the time both people admit the communication is broken, it has usually been broken for years. And by the time someone finally says something, they are not starting a conversation, they are ending one that should have happened years ago. Chapter 4. Life didn't ask for your opinion. Now here's the wild card that couples absolutely did not see coming and almost universally fail to prepare for. Not crisis, ordinary life. In the 1930s, psychologist E. Lowell Kelly began one of the longest studies of marriage ever conducted. He recruited 300 engaged couples, tested them extensively, and then followed them for the next 40 decades. By 1980, he had data spanning nearly 50 years of married life, 50 years of data, 300 couples, and the conclusion was almost unbearably simple. The marriages that lasted were not the ones without problems, they were the ones where two people kept choosing each other through the problems. The ones that collapsed had quietly stopped making that choice, not in a dramatic moment, not with a fight or a confession, but in 1,000 small Tuesday evenings where one of them chose something else instead. Research on marital satisfaction runs a curve so consistent it has its own name, the U-shape. Satisfaction starts high, drops sharply after the first child, stays low through the years of active parenting, and rises again, for couples who make it, when the children leave. Research consistently shows that couples with children report lower marital satisfaction than couples without children, across every income bracket and cultural context measured. Not slightly lower, significantly lower. The children that were supposed to strengthen the marriage quietly become the reason the marriage stops being a marriage and starts being a management system. The relationship doesn't pause while life happens, it either grows or it slowly starves. There is no neutral. Every year of neglect is a year of quiet withdrawal, and life is very good at making starvation feel like a reasonable temporary arrangement. Chapter 5. Then comes the person from outside. So your contempt is building, your communication is hollow, life has replaced intimacy with logistics, your partner is exhausted and increasingly convinced that you don't really see them anymore. Congratulations, you have just made your marriage enormously attractive to the oldest threat in the book. The research on infidelity is famously unreliable, but the most consistent finding across every study that exists is this: most affairs don't start as physical, they start as emotional. They start with someone who listens, someone who asks questions and actually waits for the answer, someone who makes the other person feel, often for the first time in years, genuinely seen. The external person doesn't cause the collapse, they reveal it. The marriage was already hollowed out. The affair is what happens when someone from outside notices you've left the door open. And here's the brutal irony: the very qualities that made someone a reliable long-term partner, consistency, predictability, stability, are the qualities that stop feeling like enough when a person feels invisible. The same steadiness that held everything together became the evidence that nothing will ever change. The same people the marriage needed to survive became the reason it felt like a sentence. Marriages don't fall to outside threats from a position of strength. They fall to outside threats because the strength was already gone. The affair is rarely the cause, it's the consequence. Chapter 6: Why It Keeps Happening. And now everybody in any failing marriage ever wanted to hear. It keeps happening because the warning signs are always visible and always ignored. Every marriage that collapses had moments, months, sometimes years, where one or both people knew something was wrong. Studies of divorced couples consistently find that the majority saw the problems clearly and did not address them, not because they didn't care, because the short-term cost of the difficult conversation felt higher than the short-term cost of postponing it. A couple exhausted by young children doesn't have the energy to confront unmet needs at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. A person afraid of conflict doesn't raise the thing that has been quietly eating them for 2 years. A partner who tried to communicate and was dismissed eventually stops trying. And the silence that follows isn't peace, it's two people separately deciding that the conversation can wait one more day. It waited, it kept waiting, and eventually it stopped being a conversation and became a distance with no name. Roman writers in the 4th century were explicitly writing about decline. Han Dynasty officials filed detailed reports about corruption and regional instability. The warnings were there in writing, left behind specifically so someone would read them. The marriages that collapsed had the same warnings: a comment that landed wrong and was never addressed, a need that was expressed once, dismissed, and never expressed again. A distance that opened so gradually that by the time anyone named it, it had been there for years. Short-term avoidance, accumulated contempt, hollowed-out communication, life mistaking itself for the enemy of the relationship and wins by default. Vulnerability finds somewhere else to go, and then someone from outside notices the door has been open for years. No couple in the early days looks at each other and says, "Yes, this is exactly how it falls apart. We should probably address that." They all believed they were different, special, structurally immune to the thing that had ended everyone else's relationship. They were wrong. Statistically, demonstrably, most of them were wrong. The good news is we have decades of peer-reviewed research, 4-decade longitudinal studies, 90% accurate predictive models, and thousands of licensed therapists explaining exactly how this process works, with specific patterns, intervention points, and names. The bad news is we have all of that, and people spend more time planning the wedding than preparing for the marriage. But hey, at least the photos are beautiful. And somewhere right now, a couple who would describe themselves as mostly happy is sitting in silence on opposite ends of a couch, both of them looking at their phones, both of them thinking they should probably talk more. They're right, they won't.